Hey y'all, and welcome back for another video. My name is Bianca and I am an ambulatory care clinical pharmacist. If you are interested in pharmacy as a profession or you're currently in pharmacy school, I do have a pharmacy playlist with a ton of videos, so please check that out. I will link it below in the description box. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's video.
Get your life, plan it out. You can go as far as you can dream. Edges laid, curls popping. She's a doctor of pharmacy.
As you can see by the title, we're going to be talking about fourth year rotations, also known as APPEs or APPEs. I will use those terms interchangeably throughout today's video. The reason I wanted to do this video is I feel like a lot of times students go into fourth year rotations and it's a nerve-wracking experience. Like, I get it. I've been there. I've also been a preceptor, so I've been on the other side. And I've seen students come in. You really don't know what to expect, right? You're at this rotation site, this new clinic, new health system for a 4 to 5 week period. And you don't know who you're going to be working with, what you're going to be doing, none of those things. So I'm hoping by the end of today's video, you will feel more prepared and you will also take the extra step to do some of these things that I recommend to help you be successful on your rotations. So in saying that, let's go ahead and get into the first tip. The very first thing that I would recommend you do as a student is make sure that you reach out to your preceptor at least 2.5 to 2 weeks before your start date. In this email, you want to make sure that you introduce yourself, ask any important questions such as what time should you arrive, what is the attire, for example, do they prefer scrubs or is business casual with a white coat preferred? Where do you park? Is parking free or do you have to pay in a garage and get that set up? It's always nice to go ahead and send your CV and resume, even though it's probably uploaded onto the portal that your preceptor should have access to. Just go ahead and attach it to that introduction email. This will be helpful for the preceptor because they can go through and see what rotations you've already completed prior to coming to them. So the question that I think is very, very important is making sure that you ask, what disease states do you see most commonly in your clinic or at your site? This is just you getting an upper hand of what disease states you should freshen up on. So if I'm your preceptor and I say, hey, thank you so much for reaching out. We do see a lot of patients with diabetes. Ding, 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 a bell should go off, right? You want to look at those guidelines. All of the disease states, they have a governing body that produces guidelines. The guidelines are like your Bible for that disease state. It's going to give you all of the guideline recommendations, your first line options, who can't and can't use it, all the things. Like, it really gives you a deep dive into the disease state. So within those 2 weeks, use that time to refreshing your knowledge on the guidelines. Now, saying all of that, you do not need to know every single thing about every single disease state, but a lot of times you haven't seen these disease states since second year of pharmacy school. Like, you learned them when you were at P2, and now 2 years later, you might get questions that come up and you're like, dang, I remember my professor talking about that, but I don't remember the answer. So that's where the guidelines come in. The next tip or suggestion actually applies more so once you get into the rotation, you understand your day-to-day workflow. If there's an area that you are struggling with, identify it early on, the first week if possible. Sometimes I know it might take middle of the second week for you to really identify what you might really be struggling with. But if there's something that you are struggling with, don't be afraid to ask your preceptor for feedback. So to my point earlier, say you're having an issue working up patients. You're getting to rounds and you're not knowing the information that you need to know because you dived so deep into their first day of admission that you didn't even think about their current state. That's something that you want to talk to your preceptor about. The easiest way to address an area that you're struggling with is to ask your preceptor how they handled that. I noticed that you get your notes done really quick. Can you share any tips for me as a student to strengthen that skill set? So it shows the preceptor that you're eager to learn and you've also identified your areas of improvement. So self-awareness is important. As a student, if you already know what you're struggling with, when it comes time for your midpoint evaluation, it's already going to be obvious, right? And you can already identify to then find solutions to improve and do better. So don't be afraid to identify. You might have points where you are struggling, and that's okay because you've never been in this situation. You've never experienced inpatient. You've never experienced, I don't know, managed care pharmacy. A lot of these rotations are going to be brand new to you, especially if you don't have any work experience in pharmacy. If you've never been a technician before, prior to coming into pharmacy school, you've only really had your 2 summer rotations as a pharmacy intern. And so all of this is a whole new world, and we get it. Like, we get it. So don't feel like you need to know everything, but also don't delay any struggles. Like, if you feel like you're struggling, don't delay that until the midpoint evaluation. Go ahead and jump on top of it and see what you can change or adjust to address it. Another thing that I don't think a lot of people take into consideration is, in my opinion, you should know what you want to take away from the experience. Really think through what the rotation can do for you and make sure that you seek those opportunities while you're at the rotation. Knowing on day 1 that I wanted to do ambulatory care, inpatient pharmacy was like, whew, this is a struggle. Like, there's no patient interaction. I'm sitting behind a computer screen. I didn't like it. But in order to get the best from that experience, I knew going into that experience what I wanted to take out of it, which for me was learning how to work up patients. So during that rotation, during the first week, I talked to my preceptor about resources she found helpful when working up patients. And it turned out she actually had a template that she used to work up patients. It had everything laid out.
The labs, what the patient presented with, so like their chief complaint, the date of admission, how long their stay was.
Working up a patient became so much easier because I was able to talk through that with my preceptor. Now, if I would have gone into that rotation with a negative outlook, like, I know I don't want to do inpatient, there's nothing I can take away from this, then it wouldn't have served me, right? So remember, these are your chances to learn and apply everything you learned in the classroom in real life.
Take what you need from it and leave what you don't. That's pretty much what I'm saying.
Something else that I find helpful, and I always recommend that my students do going into 4th year rotation, is grab a notebook. Like, purchase a pocket-sized notebook where you jot all of your thoughts, anything that comes up that you don't understand, or if you get questions that you need to look up, write those down. Acronyms that you're not familiar with, all of that goes into your notebook. Why? Because on rotations, a lot of things are going to come up, and you have to be able to grab what you need to from the conversation to look it up later. You don't always want to verbalize the things that you don't know. So say, for instance, you see HTN on a patient workup. In your mind, you're like, I've seen that before, but I don't know what that means. If you were to ask your preceptor, hey, what does HTN mean? And they say, oh, that just means hypertension. And you're like, oh, duh, I knew that. Now you're like, oh my gosh, I hope I didn't sound dumb. You don't want that to happen. So make sure that you write all of the acronyms. Anything that you don't know, just write it down. Now, if you look it up and you still don't know, you can definitely ask your preceptor. So that goes into my last point, is don't be afraid to ask questions. I know you've always heard, no question is a dumb question, but let me just say, hear me out. With your knowledge or baseline knowledge from the guidelines, you want to tread lightly. Like, ask your questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but make sure that the questions are building on the knowledge that you have already gained, right? Instead of asking, what is this diabetes medication? You want to ask, hey, I noticed that metformin is the first line, but I noticed that you chose Trulicity over Jardiance when thinking of another medication to add. Can you walk me through what your thought process was? Right? So you kind of done your baseline knowledge research, and now you're just seeking more from the preceptor. So make sure that the questions that you ask make sense, is all I'm saying. But remember, this is a chance for you to learn. So truly, it's not wrong to ask questions. That's the only way that you're going to learn. And a lot of times your preceptors have been in the field for 5+ years. Some of them maybe 20+ years. So of course, they're going to know way more than you on your baseline knowledge, because you're just coming out of your 3rd year of pharmacy school into your 4th year. So it's going to be a given that you have questions. Just make sure that you use your notebook first. Look up the questions. Unless it's something on the spot or something that you've already thought through, then absolutely go ahead and ask the question on the spot. But just be careful and mindful of how many, like if you find yourself asking a lot of questions throughout the day, you might want to take a step back and go back and refresh those guidelines that night to prepare for the next day. But like, just feel the energy in the room. If you know, you know where I'm going with that. But just make sure that you don't ask too many questions, but ask enough to get the information that you're needing in that moment. All right, y'all, that's it for today's video. I hope that this was helpful for someone. Let me know in the comments what y'all are looking forward to the most when it comes to P4 rotations. I think it is an exciting time. Although you are nervous, like you don't know what you're walking into, at the end of your rotation, I think that you will appreciate your preceptors, appreciate the team that you work with, the other students that you interacted with, and the overall experience. It's really a fun time. So take as much away from the opportunities as you're able to and learn as much as you can. Like, you will learn so much and see so many different things. If you have the opportunity to shadow other professions, I would 10 out of 10 recommend that. Don't hesitate to get your feet wet and really dive deep into that rotation to get the most out of it. So as always, thank y'all so much for watching today's video. Be sure to give it a thumbs up if you did find it helpful. Also, be sure to check out my pharmacy playlist. I will link it below in the description box. But other than that, I will see you guys on my next one. Bye.